it. And we're not going to stop him. Also not going to stop him. Halves finishes it off.
Jack Bird with his first Leeds try.
Welcome along to Matchday Live, your Leeds Rhinos game day preview show, and it's a big one here at AMT Headingley as the Rhinos return for back-to-back home games in the next fortnight, starting with a huge game against Catalans Dragons, one of the informed sides who came off a fantastic win against Warrington Wolves last time out, take on the league leaders. It's been a while since we've had to say that, so great to be back at the top of the Super League table. My name's Dan Hawkhead, a pleasure to have your company as always for this one. I'm joined by BBC Radio Leeds' Jack Conlon. Jack, we'll quickly get into the Leeds team, that's just popping up just below us now, but a fantastic win on Friday, top of the league. What better way to start the year for Brad Arthur's side, I guess?
It's been fantastic, hasn't it? You know, in terms of that form, the fact they managed to kick on, particularly in these last few weeks. I do wonder, as the season goes on, just how much we'll look back at the Hull game, for example, as a bit of a marker, as a bit of a point of difference, perhaps a point at which things change a little bit. You know, that's one of the more forgettable performances in games from the Rhinos this season, but how much has that actually had an impact on the squad and just in, I guess, raising those standards or reminding everyone of the standards, because since then they've just been a different side. The Warrington game, the Bradford game and that Huddersfield performance as well, albeit not perfect still, and you know, I think that coming out of the Huddersfield game was one of the big sort of takeaways, was that yes, this side can absolutely dominate teams, but there is still bits to fix up, and I think it comes down to that bit of concentration. I think Brad Arthur put it down to those couple of late concessions. You know, the fact they gave Huddersfield 20 points, you know, is one slight negative on what was otherwise a really positive performance.
And of course, you know, looking at the way that we especially clicked after conceding early, because I don't know about you, I was a little bit on tender hooks about where that game was going when George King went under the post. But I think there's certain players who are really picking up performances in recent weeks. Brodie Croft, I know it's very easy to highlight the man who scores 4 tries, but he doesn't score 4 for no reason, does he? Mike Acevo's I've got back on the board, he's back going again, which is fantastic to see. It seems like everything's coming together at just the right time, and I'm not trying to get ahead of ourselves here, but for the way we've started the year, and I think looking at how we're building those performances, it's a crucial block now with this game, with Wakefield next week, before we then hit another cup break, obviously not in the semi-finals, for us to really, you know, cement a place in this top 4, top 6, which will then hopefully benefit us later on in the year. Because I know we've said about, like, look at those teams who are maybe struggling. You know, it's not too early for them to pick up form again. For Leeds, though, it's about making sure we maintain that form, isn't it?
Absolutely is, and I think it's worth noting that no team is at their best yet. Absolutely no team is at their best yet, and we won't see that still for 2-3 months, I don't think, and especially as the season starts to build towards those latter rounds when playoffs actually start coming into view, and you really sort of weighing up who is going to be involved in those crucial games come the end of the season. But I think when you take it on sort of face value, in these early rounds, the Rhinos have, you know, faced a few tests, and for the most part have passed them, and I think that's really at this stage what you're wanting from a side. I think the Warrington game was a big example of that. You know, that's the first, for me, that's been their biggest test so far in 2026. It's coming up against one of the, if not the form side as they were at the time. Warrington have continued to be that, in fairness. You know, they do look really good this year. They look really strong. They've got an identity. They've got a bit about them. You know, so to beat Warrington on that night in a game that didn't go entirely the Rhinos' way, you know, it was one of those that swapped and changed a bit. You know, the momentum swung from left to right, you know, all game, and to come out on top in a game like that was as tight as it was at times, was a big tick in the box for me, and I think that's one that will will really sort of live in the memory this season, especially if they are to go on and be successful in 2026, the Rhinos. But no, I think that they're in a good place, and as you say, there's players that are picking up form week in, week out, and the fact that they've got a very settled 17 at the minute is very helpful. I think that's worth mentioning as well, is that some of the teams that are perhaps struggling, I think Wigan you can probably put in that bracket.
Yeah,
they've got a lot of injuries, are having to swap and change their lineups quite a bit, are having to play players out of position, put square pegs in round holes, etc. There's a degree of unsettlement there, whereas Leeds are the complete opposite at the minute. 3 games in a row now, Brad Arthur's named the same 17, albeit he's made some changes to the starting lineup and to the bench. He's rotated a few of his troops in that regard, but generally they've kept a settled 17, and as much as we've just discussed in past weeks that means players are missing out, which isn't ideal for them. When it comes to that on-field performance, keeping those connections, building those bonds between players, it's perfect. And I think if any coach could choose to be picking the same 17 every week, they would do, and avoiding injuries, because that's exactly where the Rhinos are at the minute, and I think you can see every week that they are benefiting from that.
And contrast that with what will be a tough Catalans Dragons side who come back here to AMT Headingley, who, as we were talking pre-show, is a little bit inconsistent with the lineups they're naming. Now, that is a little bit down to personnel. I would also argue that's maybe down to a change of head coach. Obviously, Ryan Sheridan coming in interim basis. It's a strange situation, but they're still finding results and got a big one against the Wolves like we did.
They did, yeah, and they are a strange side at times, the Catalans. They really are, especially when it comes to, when you see the 21-man squad pop up, and then when you see the matchday side, it's that they're a really, really tough side. I think probably the toughest side to predict when it comes to actual personnel and who takes to the field, who's on the bench.
Yes.
Because they do change that up so much. They've played 11 games this season in all competitions so far. Not once have they named the same 17 back-to-back. So there's always been at least one change every week from the previous lineup that they've named, which just goes to show how much variation there is when it comes to either players picking up knocks and having to be replaced, or just simply down to whoever the coaching staff deemed to be the better picks for the starting side that week. There's been variation all the way through when Joe Tompkins was in charge, in that couple of games where Ryan Sheridan's now been in charge as well, and they have picked up some great results, as you say. They're one of Super League's more inconsistent sides, you'd say, and especially when they're away from home, it's really hard to predict what version of Catalans is going to turn up, because when they are on it, they play some really nice rugby league and some really threatening rugby league, and can be a real handful to deal with. But at the same time, there's occasions, and it's not just exclusive to this season. It's been the case, I think, for a fair few years with the Dragons, especially when they are away from home, that they can turn up and be a bit toothless, and they can be a team that you can get at. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for Leeds is judging in that opening, I guess, 5-10 minutes, that opening period of the game, which Catalan side they're up against. Regardless, Leeds need to bring their A game and do the job, as they did against Huddersfield last week, against a poor Huddersfield side. I guess that side doesn't change, but it'll be interesting to see just how Catalans are when they turn up and how good they look, particularly when we get that first impression in the first 10 minutes or so.
I think St Helens is a great example of that. Looking at the cup quarter final against Saints, absolutely walked the floor. I mean, beaten granted a close contest, but that win over Toulouse the week before. Came to St Helens, lost big, then somehow get it on form back at home against Warrington. But I personally thought Catalan had sort of lost that when they'd done the grand finals in 21 and 23. It looked like they were sort of building. They just seem to regress that little bit over the last few years, which, granted, it's probably got a change of personnel in the back room and on the field. Let's just look at our key players for this week. All of which are new names to the Dragons. They cleared the board during the off-season and brought in some real talent. Start with Charlie Staines, who has just been absolutely exceptional.
He's been great at fullback. I think he's Super League's top meter maker at the minute, and that's just a testament to the work he gets through, actually. I think I'm right in saying as well, second in those Super League stats charts for meters is Lockie Miller, but he's 200 metres behind Charlie Staines. We know how much work Lockie Miller gets through. We see that on a week-to-week basis. How much much running he does. So, you know, that I think straight away is a mark of the effort that Charlie Staines puts in as a player. But yeah, he's a real dynamic fullback, and he surprised me actually how well he's adapted, because when he played in the NRL, although he came through as a fullback, he ended up on the wing, played a lot more as a winger at West Tigers as well. You know, his career as a senior first team professional has very much been built on being a winger. So when he came over here, or not right to the south of France, you know, I think it was quite obvious that he was their full-back signing, but I wondered just how well he'd adapt to that position again and slot back in there. But he really has done. You know, he's got a lot of the traits that you'd want in a modern-day full-back. He's got a good passing game. His support running is really good as well. You know, he's constantly on the shoulder of whoever's taking the ball forward, looking for that offload, looking to break through the line, as a lot of the best full-backs do. And he's found a real nice connection with this new halves pairing as well of Lewis Dodd and Toby Sexton, who I know are also on our sort of list of key players to watch, because they've been really impressive, I think, in these early rounds. But yeah, you made the point, Dan. They cleared the decks in the off season in Catalans, and I think that's a bit of a trend of the Dragons, because they seem to almost every year have quite a big recruitment drive and, you know, clear a lot out, bring a lot in, and that was no different in the winter this year. I think it's looking like there's some really nice pickups, I think, in there. Not least another player that I know we're going to come on to, Zach Lipowitz, who is a back rower that I think has sort of gone under the radar a little bit. He's one of only 3 ever-present players in that ever-changing Catalans lineup, as we discussed. He's played all 11 games and has looked really, really tidy, I think, throughout. He's their top tackler this year, so gets to a lot of defensive work. But yeah, he's just he's a bit of a toiler again, and as I say, a player who came over with a very, very little reputation, very little baggage, wasn't very well known. Came through the Penrith Panthers system, which I think is a very good grounding for any player, you know, given what
some would say the best grounding, looking at how clubs are now modelling themselves off the back of what they did.
I think so. You know, the way that they've been as a club for the past 5-6 years, obviously having the NRL success, but the pathway that they have developed over there for players to break into their side and continue that legacy and continue to keep that high standard. You know, he's a product of that, and I think that's very much showing in the way that he just performs as a rugby player. You know, I think he only made the sole NRL appearance when he was over at Penrith, but has come into this Catalan side. You know, wasn't guaranteed game time, was given the number 20 shirt, so very much on the outer on first look, as you'd imagine, but as I say, has been ever present in that starting side. So has clearly made a very good impression, and yeah, he's one of the quieter but more successful acquisitions from Catalans in the off season. So again, you know, we've gone through 4 players there they've picked up in the off season and have looked really good, and I think that's been very. I think that is a theme this year, certainly for Catalans. They've not really had many duds, as you would say, in terms of signings that they've made, and you know, it's been a variety of recruitment as well. They've plucked some players from the NRL, from the State Cup over there, from some other Super League sides. You know, so they've looked far and wide to bring players in, and generally they've all performed so far.
And just on Lipowitz, I think he's part of a real forward pack that knows their job this year. I know Joel Tompkins initially, and off the back of his sort of period at the back end of last year after Steve McNamara left, I think what he's sort of does is galvanise that forward pack and really giving them the job of, you're just going to go out there and beat people up. Whether it's Busquets starting with Isaac Fasul-Malawi, whether you've then got Satai coming off the bench, you've got Lipowitz out on the edge, who did a great try assist for one of the De La Torre tries at the weekend. Just he's got great hands. I think they've got a forward pack now that's got a lot of ability and is starting to get that, I guess, that little bit of grit about them. Whereas last year, I think it's fair to say that they were rolled over at times. Maybe not here, when obviously they beat us here at Headingley, but I think they were pushovers, and that mentality has changed. It starts with new personnel, and it starts with good coaching as well. And
there's a good amount of variety, I think, as well in that forward pack. I know we've talked about how much they rotate, but I guess another angle you could take on that, another way you could look at it, is that they've got the options, and they've got viable options that are all pushing each other constantly. You know, I mean, again, Harvey Wilson is involved in that group, who I've really liked when he was at Salford. You know, I thought he was one of the few unsung heroes in that sort of struggling Salford side last year, given all the the off-field drama they were going through. There were a group of players there that really sort of held on, and he was a big part of that. And he's gone over to the south of France and looked good, can play just about anywhere in that forward pack. So he's another example. But I think it says a lot when the likes of Isaac Fasuamalawi, who was one of their bigger name off-season signings, certainly in the forward pack in the winter. He's spent time out of the squad this season simply through selection, not through injury. He's been 18th man once or twice. He's been out of the side entirely, out of the sort of matchday 17 or 18, just simply down to the numbers that they've got and the players that they've got and who they can call on. Good as well, I think, to see as well. Another young French forward coming through, Alexis Lees.
I was just about to say about him.
Who has sort of come out of nowhere, but has seemingly demanded a place in their squad this year. Again, very little known about him before 2026, other than being, a big young French lad, and that is simply all that was really known about him. But again, he's demanded a spot in that side. Initially off the bench, playing a bit as a front rower, has started in the back row in recent weeks as well. Again, knocking some more senior and probably on paper, better or traditionally better forwards further down the pecking order. He's sidestepped a few of those, so I think that's an indication of just where he's at in his development and how highly they think of him at Catalan. But great to see another young French player coming through. They've got a good handful over at Catalans now. Having perhaps built a reputation or being labelled a side that haven't developed players as much as they perhaps should in recent years. That there are players now that are pushing through and that are demanding minutes. Guillermo Espero-Bichet is one that I really like. Not had as much of a look in this year, but certainly last season was in that fullback role quite a bit. I think they're probably managing his development a bit more this year and have that luxury to do so too. But
had a great run out against Warrington as well.
Exactly.
First appearance of the year,
precisely.
And he absolutely dominated.
Exactly, he was really good. So I think there's a good handful of players there that are coming on and are looking good in that Catalan side, and the likes of him and Alexis Lees are at the forefront of that.
Absolutely, and it's great to see that they've almost backed up. They've always had French players coming through there, but they're really backing up some real quality at the top end with these young French lads that are absolutely coming through. And Leo De Relator is another one of those. He's just absolutely dynamite out on the wing. He's scoring tries for fun at the minute. Just quickly back to Staines. It's not often that you get an NRL Premiership winner come into your fold. Obviously, he's known that Penrith system. Adding him into what they've already had in Tommy Makinson, Nick Kotrick, Fatatape, who we'll come on to as well. He's elevated that attack just by having his name on the team sheet each week, doesn't he, Charlie Staines?
Absolutely, it does. And the Dragons are all the better for it as well. You've got to say, they look much better for having him in the side. That's no slight on Espero-Bichet, who was in that fullback role for a lot of last season, but I think you can tell the difference when you've got someone who is a bit more weathered and has played in that men's game, that men's environment for a fair old while. Staines isn't old by any stretch. I think he's mid-20s, I want to say. He's
24. He's got plenty of rugby ahead of him.
Well, exactly. He's got so much rugby ahead of him. But, again, he's another one of those that's a product of that Penrith development system, that junior system, has come through their pathways, broke into their first team for a good chunk, and eventually was just sort of muscled out again by salary cap restraints and other players that were in that position. But you can tell the difference. I think having someone like that full back, and I think I think often players go to Catalan, and I think it's a bit more of a relaxed environment possibly than coming to an English Super League side, for the fact that they're almost on their own little island over there and are almost away, I guess, from the lights and the attention a bit more. They can live what I imagine is quite a lovely life on the
I can imagine being quite
on
nice.
on the south coast of France. So I think they quite enjoy the life down there, but they're not under the spotlight as much, I don't think, and so there's not as much pressure on them. And I think players like a Charlie Staines are really benefit from that.
Absolutely, and another two players who we've said will come on to. We've combined them together for this, but Toby Sexton and Lewis Dodd on paper looked a brilliant combination when they were first announced as coming over to the Dragons. I know Dodd obviously struggled in the NRL, but has a pretty good CV from his time with St Helens. I say pretty good, Grand Final winner and a World Club winner is puts him in pretty good stead. Toby Sexton came off the back of, I think, a tough exit at the Dogs after obviously they brought Lockie Galvin in. He was sort of kicked to the curb a little bit, despite playing some really nice rugby, and was a real part of how Canterbury started last season so well. He comes in for what will be a year. He's part of the Perth Bears team for next year. But as a combination, it's been developing. I think there'll be a team, and that'll be a combination that later in the year we will definitely see the better of. And if we're seeing how they're playing now, we'll see them even better when it gets to the real crunch time.
I think without a doubt, Lewis Dodd certainly is looking so much more like the player again that broke through at St Helens and that looked good for Saints in those early years. He's had a tough couple of years now. Obviously didn't really get much of a look in at South Sydney. I think the writing was on the wall for him when I remember the video being released of Wayne Bennett asking who he was, which is never a good indication, I don't think, from your coach when he doesn't know who you are.
No.
So yeah, he never really got a look in over there. His final season at Saints, he ended up falling down the pecking order as well, but I think he's gone, well, I say he's come back over to Super League, he's gone to the Dragons and really sort of found himself again, and just found a confidence, and he's looking all the better for it as well. I think it helps having a Sexton alongside him, who equally is a very good managing fullback. Was at the Bulldogs last season, got nudged out the way by Lockie Galvin, like he said. But I seem to remember a lot of Bulldogs fans at the time, a lot of Canterbury fans, saying they almost preferred having Sexton there because
yes, I do.
Just in the way and the complexion of their sort of halves and spine. Sexton, while he might not have been the one that catches the headlines, and that was partly what I think the Bulldogs were going for with a Galvin, was this superstar combination. Sexton was just steady, and he just kept them ticking over, and he's that kind of halfback, and I think he's very much producing the same for Catalan at the minute. He's looking really, really solid. Again, has been an ever-present this year, which Charlie Staines is the other one, by the way, of those three. There's him, Lipowitz and Sexton that are the three that have been ever-present for Catalan. They're all better for it, and I think Sexton is so central to everything they do, especially in attack going forward. He's just a general, and I think he takes a lot of the pressure then off Dodd. And as I say, they're only 10-11 games into a partnership for those two, but they are looking really promising already, and I think they will only improve as Super League goes on. I
think they'll be absolute ones to watch today. I think tonight it's going to be an absolute thrill to see them out there. I think what's really nice for me to see is that, yeah, Sexton's confirmed for Perth next year, but he's giving absolutely everything to that Dragons cause. It'd be arguable that some halfbacks and some signings for the Dragons in recent years haven't done that. They've come over for the payday, they've done the job and disappeared, whereas Sexton, despite having his future confirmed, is still playing, like we've said, his best rugby. He's at the top of his game and he cares. He actually is out there trying to make things happen, and we see with the tries he scored this year, with the tries he's setting up, just how much, he's having a great time in the south of France, but actually he knows where this team can potentially go by the end of the season and wants to push them that way. It's great to see that a halfback wants to do that.
I think so, and I think that's actually indicative of the recruitment drive that they've made in the off-season, Catalans. They've not gone for the big names as much that, as you say, in previous years have flattered to deceive. A recent example is Takiaho, who is playing really well now for Manly in the NRL, but we barely saw him for Catalans. He was out injured, he had other issues, and only ended up playing a handful of games in a couple of seasons. He's an example of going for a big name that doesn't really work, and they've probably done that a bit too much in the last 10 or so years of Catalans. But I think you look at the players that they brought in this time around, there's a lot of players in there who you'd probably say have something to prove. There's the two that are going to Perth in Sexton and Fasuma La'awi. You've got their futures sorted, but what harm does it do them coming to Super League for a year and going full on into it?
Absolutely.
But otherwise, there's Josh Allen, there's Ben Condon, there's Phoenix Lautonga, there's Solomon Fatatapi, who we're going to come on to very shortly. All players who came from primarily the State Cup in Australia, or in Lautongai's case, Hull KR via Oldham, that are all, you'd imagine they're searching for that that consistent run at first team top grade rugby that they've not had. They've played a lot of rugby at second tier level, be that in the reserves comp over in Australia and the championship over here, but haven't had that proper crack at Super League or at the NRL, and this is very much their chance to do it. And I think that's very much, certainly if you look at the trend in terms of those signings, that seems what Catalans were going for, players that want to turn up and prove that they deserve to be in that starting shirt in Super League, playing at the top level. You know, whether or not that earns them moves elsewhere in the future, be that back to the NRL for some of them or elsewhere in Super League, you know, that's a conversation for the future. But certainly in the immediate term, that seems to be the way that Catalans have gone, is that trying to find players that have something to prove and want to do that as part of the Dragons side.
And the longer those lads can stick around, obviously, the better as well, because we like seeing, you've seen Malawis, your Sextons, your Staines, and we can't wait to see them here at AMT Headingley. Now on to our head-to-head, and we've picked 2 West Tigers teammates. I didn't know Jack until I'd done a little bit of research into this, that they'd actually played together. I thought they might have played opposite each other, but I forgot about Jack Bird's little spell at the West Tigers at the back end of his career. We picked Jack Bird up against Solomane and Fatatape. And let's start jumping off the back of what we talked about, the Catalan Dragons. Fatatape has been another one of those names brought in alongside Staines from the Tigers, who is he's a demon out on the edge. He's not just stats wise. He's one of the top players for, I believe it's meters for carries, but his offload game is incredible. He's providing Daryl Latour with tries for fun. He will be an absolute. He will decide tries. He'll decide the result tonight if possible. Fatatape.
He's a brilliant player. He's a real strike centre. Ever present this year for Catalans, by the way, as well. He's. I got my West Tigers players mixed up a minute ago. It's Charlie Staines. I think has missed one game.
Got it.
The 3 ever presents for Catalans this year are Sexton, Lipowitz, and Solomon Fatatape, and he's so good in that left centre spot. As you say, teammates or former teammates with Jack Bird, so I think it's a really interesting head-to-head we've got this week, and they will be playing opposite each other. Jack Bird in that right centre spot for Leeds, Fatatape in the left centre spot.
Because we might have bent the rules in recent weeks.
Ever so slightly, but they will be directly opposite each other, which is fantastic, and will be a really interesting battle. Interestingly, I was looking this week as well at their sort of history at Wests, and they played 2 games together last season. Now, Fatatape played much more for the Wests NRL side in the season before, but never played with Bird up until 2025, in which there was 2 games. There was one where Fatatape started, Bird was on the bench, but the most recent game they played, which I think was last March time, so maybe just over a year ago, they both started and they're on the same side, and Bird was the centre, Fatatape was the winger, and it was the game in which they were beaten late on by the Warriors. So they led for a good chunk. Fatatape scored a try in that game as well, on that left edge, but they were beaten. They were pipped to the post. I think it was 26-24 in the end. They were beaten by the Warriors. But you'd imagine, given that they both certainly trained in the outside backs, again played that one game together, that they will be relatively familiar with each other's game and just how they play, which we say this is going to be a really good battle. It might just end up that they cancel each other out completely.
Yeah, it could be.
You never really know, because I think Bird's shown in recent weeks that he's a really good defensive centre. He's got a good bit about him in attack, but defensively he just finds himself in the right positions, knows when to go, knows when to stay, knows where to be in the right positions, and that's been one of the real sort of good facets of his game, I think, since we've seen him at the Rhinos. Fatatape, meanwhile, as I was about to say, they're real strike centre for Catalan. Almost the complete package as well, I think. Again, a player that's sort of been a real smart find. Not particularly well known to many Super League fans, I don't think. I think less than 30 NRL games. So he's played the majority of his time over there in the State Cup, and has been really, that's very much been his grounding, and he's hit the ground running for Catalans this season. He's got a good handful of tries, put on some really nice assists. You mentioned his offloading game, really tidy. He's dangerous. I think he's one of those players as well that he's dangerous regardless almost of the situation he finds himself in, be that from close range or from far out, be that against 2 defenders or if they've got a 2-on-1 overlap. Against 3 defenders, he's a powerful, nuggety centre with a good turn of pace, and He's one of the players as well that I think could have a really, really long career in Super League.
Yeah.
He's sort of at his mid-20s point now. The other one that I'd say that comes into that similar sort of bracket is Christian Mapapalangi, who I know we raved about a few weeks ago when Leeds were playing Castleford, and has since gone on to be brilliant. You look at how he played against Wigan in that surprise win at the weekend just gone. We're going off on a bit of a tangent there, but I think certainly that they are similar, not necessarily in the way they play the game, but in their centres that I think will really benefit from coming over to Super League. Whether or not that'll lead them on a path back to the NRL or not, I'm not sure. But I think they could both have really long careers in Super League. They remind me of, I think Fatapia in particular, is maybe a bit of a throwback to like a Willie Talau, who was at Saints all those years ago and was so good in that left centre spot. Just powerful, really hard to stop, tough runner. Can score tries for fun. Probably not as big as Talau, but I think the point very much still stands. Strike centre that they will look to and have looked to Catalan, feed him as much as they can, because once he gets the ball in his hands, particularly if he's got space to run into, he can be so dangerous. No matter who's on that wing with him, as you say, Leo Dorelator has been an option there. They've had Tommy Makinson and Nick Kotrick both put on the left wing this season and last. So they've got options to put outside him, but he's one of the real key players for them, I think, and a real area of danger. As I say, Jack Bird though is a pretty formidable opponent and has shown that in his early Rhinos career so far.
He's really developed, hasn't he? I think Jamie Langley was saying very recently, I believe on the Leeds Rhinos podcast, that he's someone, like you were saying, he's someone who knows when to go, knows when to stay. I think that's just been down to the hard work that he's done when the boys were in Vegas, when that game against Cass going back, because he's very much, I think he said on our own podcast that he thought he was in for that Cass game, or he said he was very up for playing that Castleford game. Wasn't in the lineup that day. Has bided his time, but I think it's that point where he's learned the system. He's now found where he fits in the Rhinos system. He's learnt it like the back of his hand now, and that he's one of those that's undroppable now. Whether you're out on an edge with Ryan Hall, that's as equally as threatening now as Ash Hanley and Mike Sevo on the opposite. You've got two very different wingers on the opposite sides. Mike Sevo's up. Yeah, he's a big, strong finisher, but he's he's got that athleticism behind it. Ryan Hall's brilliant at finishing from close range. Ash Hanley's got the speed. Jack Bird just has a bit more rugby nous, would you say? You've almost got two edge pairings that are both very individual in themselves.
Well, I think it's twofold with Jack Bird. I think he's very physical, first and foremost. He's well built, and that's one thing that surprised me since seeing him in a Leeds Rhinos shirt, is just how physical he is. I think 2 or 3 times now he's bumped players to the ground, when especially when he's taken those sort of runs back towards the middle of the field where he's sort of crabbed across a little bit looking for a gap. He's sort of realised there's not one there, so right, I'm going to go through you as opposed to around you. And has knocked players to the ground. He did that against Huddersfield last week. I can't think which player it was, but he ended up on his backside, whoever that poor Giants middle was.
I think that comes from playing back row, actually.
I'd agree. I do agree. I think the fact he can play in the forwards if needs be has developed that side of his game. So he's very physical, but on the other hand, as you say, he's got that rugby nous, which I think has come from playing halfback in his career. He's a player where that versatility, I think, has. Now he's towards the back end of his career. He's still, so is he 30, 31 maybe?
He's
late
20s,
yeah. He's not in the sort of twilight ages, as you'd sort of say, of his career, but he's sort of further along enough that he's not a spring chicken anymore. He's got that. He's developed that experience and that rugby nous and that bit of grit, and that's I guess that tough shell as well, particularly from playing over in the NRL where players are a lot more scrutinised. He's played in a position that is heavily scrutinised. I remember him coming through at Cronulla, playing in the centre, playing in the halves, was part of that Premiership winning side, that Premiership winning Cronulla side that, at the time he was very much the next big thing. And injuries have hampered exactly how far he can progress, but he's still always been a very solid player whenever he's performed, I've thought, and like I say, has developed that sort of tough shell, I think, about him, both from a mentality point of view, but also a physical point of view as well when it comes to actually the physical side of the game. I think I'm with you when you say that he's undroppable at the minute. We're seeing this week again Harry Newman go back out on loan to Hull FC, Jeremiah MATCHDAY going with him, which I think is great, by the way, for sort of match experience and getting some runs on the board for him in Super League.
Having played a few reserves games as well, I think it's good for him
Correct.
to be making that. It's that chance to see him make that step up, isn't it?
Agreed. And again, I think as we said last week with Harry Newman, it's going to a Hull FC side that are probably in a bit of disarray at the minute, given everything that's going on there with John Cartwright, and they're not a direct rival of the Rhinos as it stands. So I think it's a smart move, and one that benefits all parties again. But yeah, Jack Bird I think is undroppable at the minute, and he is the player that is demanding that right centre spot. And on the balance of his first three performances as a Rhinos player, first three starts in a Rhinos shirt, he absolutely deserves it. And yeah, as you say, undroppable at the minute for me.
Undroppable, and hopefully can get a try like he did against Warrington too. If that's if Fat Tappe has anything to say about it, he will be the man trying to stop him. Now, if you've not got a ticket for tonight's game, you can still get tickets online at tickets.therhinos.co.uk. See if you can grab yourself a South Stand Terrace ticket or wherever you can to not miss any of the action. But if you're unable to be here at AMT Headingley, you can watch all the action live. It's on Sky Sports Plus as one of the bonus streams. So just go for Rugby League and then that'll show up right there. We're not on a main channel this week. Meaning we're also on Super League Plus. So if you're a Super League Plus subscriber, make sure you find our stream on there and get watching. Don't miss any of the action. If you wanted to listen, if you're out and about and going places, we always push yourself to our great friends at BBC Radio Leeds. Jack, you guys have got full match commentary from on Friday night, or tonight even?
We have, yes, on all frequencies on BBC Radio Leeds. James Dayton and Barry Eaton again for this game with you, taking through every minute of it. Build-up starts at 7 o'clock, full build-up for that 8 o'clock kickoff.
Fantastic, where you will get all the extra views and opinions of today's game. Well, my thanks to Jack, as always, a brilliant analyst and great guest on this. My name's been Dan Hawkhead, and team news is coming next.